Hello everyone, and welcome to today's special interview with McNicholas, Head of Regulatory Affairs and Enforcement at Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority VARA in Dubai. So Dubai and the UAE are trying to position themselves at the forefront of the digital asset space. VARA is playing a pivotal role in shaping the regulatory landscape to foster innovation while ensuring compliance. Today, we're gonna dive into the regulatory framework of VARA, its impact on the blockchain and virtual asset space. So thank you for joining us, Nicholas.
Thank you, Ali.
It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
So to start with, I would like, because you are new in the town, so I'd like to give us a little bit of introduction about your background and how you reach VARA.
Sure. Thank you, Walid. Yes, so I've been in the UAE just under a year, and I formerly came from the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, where I worked as a governance specialist in authorizations and fit and proper. Before that, I had a background in law. I started life out as a lawyer in London and then in Dublin. Starting off in criminal law and then branching out into other matters such as taxation and European. And then in 2010, just after the global financial crisis, I joined the Central Bank of Ireland's enforcement team to help implement their new fit and proper regime, and also to help with some of the investigations that were ongoing against the banks and the financial companies. So that job then took me into Frankfurt, to the European Central Bank, where I'd been for 9 years. And then I moved here last year with my family. I continued to work for the ECB for a while. And then earlier this year, went through the interview process with VARA, and landed here in Dubai from Abu Dhabi in June of this year. So I think this week is my 3-month anniversary at VARA, so still quite new.
Welcome in Dubai. Dubai always continue to attract talents and amazing people like you. So giving your extensive experience in the space, in the compliance space and regulatory space, so what are the challenges that you think we are facing in the digital asset space nowadays?
Yeah, so many of the challenges that apply in traditional finance also apply for virtual assets, but some of them are more enhanced. The first thing, of course, is that in virtual assets, the technology moves at an incredible pace. And therefore, a regulatory regime that understands that and is agile to an extent and adaptive, I think works best, because what may work today may not work in 6 months. I think for any regulator in this space, they need to be forward-looking and engaging very much with the industry to not guess what's coming along down the road, but to actually know the projects, the pilots, the business models that the industry are hoping to bring. The idea with VARA, of course, is to provide a safe regulatory framework within which to do that, to allow the firms to come to operate effectively and safely. So I would say that the fast pace of technology is certainly one. With that then comes the necessity for a regulator to have a reasonably open approach with industry, in terms of collaborating with industry and in terms of consulting with them, and making sure that what works in the regulatory sphere is appropriate for what is coming down the line in industry. Digital assets are obviously truly global. A lot of TradFi is, but there is an enhanced risk in terms of the global nature of virtual assets. That leads to a number of things. An absolute requirement for sharing and cooperation with other international regulators, and also absolute certainty and rules over know your client, anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, proliferation financing, all of these things that can be harder to detect when the trail of the money is longer and wider and more international. So I think international enforcement or international regulation and cooperation is also a challenge that we have. So many of the companies that may be advertising into Dubai may not necessarily be registered here, and that can present a challenge also from an enforcement perspective, which clearly needs international cooperation.
Yeah, I believe probably the enforcement of the travel rule will help a lot to clarify this this specific angle. But unfortunately, with few places or few countries with good regulations and the rest are not, so to apply travel rule is going to be a nightmare for regulated countries.
I think so. I think FATF are obviously doing a huge effort to try and harmonise these rules as much as it can internationally, and the travel rule being one of them, and the other measures that they're putting in place.
Yeah. So what would be your priority for the upcoming 1-2 years as head of regulatory and enforcement?
Well, I think in terms of enforcement, we want to establish a fast, effective enforcement mechanism and methodology that's robust and fair. This will mean a couple of things. It means that as more virtual asset service providers become licensed within Dubai, the day-to-day supervision of these will crank up. And obviously, out of that day-to-day supervision, whilst some matters may be weaknesses or deficiencies, others may present breaches of the rules and regulations. And we need to have a credible and effective threat of enforcement to make sure that the VASPs stay in line with the regulations. I mean, they ultimately are the first line of defense, and if they're doing their own self-supervisory jobs properly, then hopefully we don't detect too much of that. But if our supervision teams step in and find out that some of the regulations are being breached, we need a seamless transfer of those cases to the enforcement division, and then fast and effective enforcement. It also means that given VARA is relatively new and the licensing regime is relatively new, there still remains a lot of entities, not just in Dubai, but globally, who operate outside of the license sphere. And in order to have a safe ecosystem, we need to make sure that all firms offering virtual asset activity, since the VARA laws were brought into place, are now licensed and within our purview and within that safety net. So part of the strategy is also to try and eliminate or bring to the table those firms that are operating in an unlicensed manner. I think down the line, in terms of regulatory affairs, we obviously need to keep abreast a little bit what I was saying earlier with the technological developments. So we're constantly looking at different areas that technology is presenting in terms of the many faceted different types of virtual assets that we're seeing, and we're preparing ways in which to deal with those as they come along. So I think keeping abreast of those technology changes and making sure that our regulations and that our rule books are up to date and let's say relevant for those challenges, that's also part of the strategy, the short-term strategy.
So before the latest announcement of the MOU between SCA and VARA, I would say that people used to always look into the UAE as a kind of a chaotic place whenever it comes to where to go for regulation. Shall I go to the IFC? Shall I go to VARA? Shall I go to ADGM? So it wasn't always clear, and it was, at least for people coming really from outside. So the latest announcement, the coordination that you're trying to build between VARA and SCA will really clarify a lot for VASPs, new clients, new people joining the space in the UAE. So what's next between you and SCA, and how you evaluate this agreement or this MOU?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we hope so. We were delighted to finally sign that agreement with SCA recently, and we hope that gives some clarity to the industry that if they get a license here from VARA in Dubai, they can essentially offer the services throughout the UAE and vice versa. We will have a simple registration regime in place, which we're currently working out the technical details of. But that should be an easy process and not cause any obstacles to the firms that wish to offer the services federally. I agree with you. In a federal system, it's always trickier. Coming from a one-state country, I didn't have to deal with those issues as a lawyer, but when landing in Dubai, we have the mainland, we have the free zones, and then we have the federal, and also the free zones within the federal. And this absolutely gives some complexity to the arrangements. What I would say is that I think given virtual assets are truly global, a lot of these firms can almost choose where they wish to get their license. Of course, we hope they come to Dubai, but it still means that they can choose where to go. So within that, even in Europe, for example, with the MiCAR licenses, a certain service provider can decide to approach one of the member states and then passport in after that. So there is a certain amount of forum shopping or regulatory arbitrage. We don't mean it to be so. We work very well and cooperatively with all our local neighbourhood agencies here. Our peers, yeah, exactly. And we're still working on developing that further in terms of, like, ESCA is the first MOU, but there will be other MOUs that follow, we hope. And that is one of our priorities, indeed, for regulatory affairs. I should also mention that when you have an MOU in place, it also facilitates the sharing of information, because we're all developing, this is a very new area, we're all developing an expertise in this area. Each particular agency has its strength, and through sharing the information, not only the knowledge that we learn, but also the information that we have about the firms from an enforcement or a supervisory or regulatory perspective, improves our overall understanding of the ecosystem here in the UAE, and also ultimately the supervision and enforcement should anything go wrong with that.
So, talking about the market, being a voice of this ecosystem, the banking access has been challenging for VASPs, for at least what we heard about. So anything in this regard that may facilitate the relation with the traditional banking system, the off-RAM, on-RAM capability for VASPs?
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is interesting because clearly there has been a certain reticence with some of the banks to fully engage with virtual assets, and with good reason. In some cases, they have to calculate the risk, and it's about understanding that risk. VARA, one of VARA's tasks is to try and educate, provide its own analysis of the risks of the market, perhaps work with the banks and the VASPs to try and see if a mutual understanding can be reached. I think it is moving in certain ways. There have been certain developments with the traditional banks, and for example, Standard Chartered recently now has a global hub for custody services. Morgan Stanley have allowed 15,000 of its brokers to recommend ETFs in Bitcoin. You have the Nomura Laser Digital, and also JP Morgan's blockchain platform, Onyx. So I think there are movements in this field. In Europe also, fintech companies now moving into the banking sphere have also offered exchange services. Revolut, for example, with the recent FCA license. So I think the gap is happening. Of course, at the other side of this, you have the central bank digital currencies, which clearly are embracing that side of the technology. So it's moving in all directions towards using DLT or blockchain or virtual assets. And I think the more permeating these concepts become, the more accepted or the more conversant with the risks the banks will be. And this should mean better access to the banks from the virtual asset service providers. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I think from VARA's perspective, all we can do is to try and help vocalize and communicate the risks that we see, and do what we can if we, in terms of that education piece or a brokerage piece, if there is one.
Yeah, this will bring me back to a round table we did with a couple of banks and VASPs together, discussing the same. And my takeaway was, what's in it for me as a bank? So for them, they don't see much of profit out of this operation, and a lot of risk associated with it, and compliance procedure, and so on and so forth. So what I believe might engage banks in a bigger, the full picture is the tokenization and real-world asset tokenization. So later, in the past couple of months, maybe Matthew did a statement that he is into conversation with different stakeholders in the space, trying to put together a roadmap for tokenization regulation. So do you have any update on that?
Yeah, no particular updates, but I think it's an extremely exciting space. A real-world asset tokenization, I think, is built to be worth $4 trillion by the end of 2030. We're certainly seeing interest in various different types of tokenization, be that in gold, in property, in financial instruments such as fixed income investments or bonds or shares. So clearly there's huge scope for the traditional finance mechanisms to marry up with this idea of tokenization. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how that develops. We have, of course, our issuance rulebook, which is one of the rulebooks which can be seen on VARA's website. And this does talk about Category 1 and Category 2 tokens. And most of these will fall into the Category 1, which really are related to some kind of real-world asset. So again, a bit like what I said at the very start, what might apply today may not be pertinent in 6 or 12 months. So again, we're trying to keep up to date and move along with the proposals and the technology that's happening, and also the business models. And clearly the business model, the business idea has to make sense in order for a license to be granted. It needs to be workable. And yeah, it's exciting to see. Our licensing team are certainly thinking about all of this, along with the legal team, to see what new developments, if any, need to be made in this space. But no particular updates at the moment, other than I think it's a really interesting space. It's certainly something that we're looking at.
In the making.
And in the making, yeah.
Yeah. So what is the expectation now from what do you expect in 2024 to achieve in terms of VASP license? How many is still more in the pipeline?
I think we have something like 20 or 30
in the pipeline.
Well, licensed at this moment. So in terms of the numbers, there are plenty applying. How advanced they are in their license application, it's hard to say. But I think we could accept the same, if not a greater pace in the amount going into the end of this year and next year.
So an interesting conversation I'm always having with a small project in town, trying to build innovative ideas on blockchain. So they believe that VARA should have like easiest path for small project. We're not talking about VASPs, we're not talking about exchanges, we're talking about small project trying to prove something. They have a use case at hand and they try to build it, but they need somehow to be able to interact with different entities, and they should have a basic license on that. So do you have any plan on that? Try to accommodate those small entities to be able, starting from the fees and the process itself, maybe virtual offices or whatever?
Mm-hmm. I think firstly, the whole structure behind VARA is designed to be relatively accessible, even for the smaller firms. That means that hopefully not large teams of lawyers or consultants are required in order for a smaller entity to get up and off the ground. Having said that, clearly they need to come with a professional, well-designed, structured and thought-through business plan, or else they won't get past the initial screening. Having said that, also there are projects and thought processes going on in the background surrounding things like regulatory hosting, or allowing larger licensed entities to somehow have smaller entities ride on their backs within tightly controlled mechanisms and clearly tested platforms. So these are things that we're exploring. And the idea is not just to allow the bigger players in. Of course, it's to open the market to all good business ideas and innovations, regardless of size. Clearly, scale and size can help when you're putting through these things, but at the same time, we don't want to exclude it. Also, I think we are an open, collaborative regulator, and therefore, if somebody does have questions or concerns around this, it is possible to get in touch, and we're more than willing to help where we can.
So, going back to what's coming, or what are the priorities of VARA and on the next stage? So we talked about real-world assets. So do we expect VARA to go for different consultation paper on, let's say, DAO regulation, DeFi regulation, or anything in the pipeline?
There's no definitive ideas on how to do this yet. I think public consultation works very well. I would say that definitely we're open to that where it makes sense. And you might say it makes sense in most of those cases that you've mentioned. And I think public consultation works very, very well because it can hone our own ideas about where the regulation can go. And very often you send it out to industry and you get extremely good feedback, which can shape and improve the ultimate document. As I've said a few times, the regulation has to be workable, and therefore working in tandem with the industry, with the VASPs or the want-to-be VASPs, is crucial in getting these things right. So I would say public consultation can work very well, and if it can be done, if it's suitable in those particular instances, then I would say that is the case. In terms of any upcoming proposed public consultations on these, I don't know of any.
So my last question here about more awareness about the role of VARA, about the digital asset space. So what is VARA doing to educate more, and I mean educating the public sector more than the private sector? I feel the private sector are self-learner more than the public sector. So any plans, any programs that you are implementing, trying to engage more with other government entities?
Yeah. I mean, in regulatory affairs, through international cooperation and local cooperation, namely organising workshops or best practice visits or being part of working groups, we're doing our best to be as part of as many of those as we can. So that means sharing information from our side and also taking information from the other side. And this industry, I think, thrives on that when the sharing is done and the obstacles or the challenges are presented and discussed. And there are many great forums to do this in. So we're party to many of those forums. Education and outreach is something that's very much also part of our strategy. So in terms of how we do that and when we do that, and looking at our communications people will help us with that, but I think we're all involved in it together.
Yeah, you're doing great all together. Nicholas, thank you for your time and for this opportunity, and looking forward to meet again with the big updates soon.
Thank you, Ali. It's lovely to be here. Cheers.